Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today we're discussing how trade barriers are making life in Canada more expensive. No, not those new trade barriers imposed by President Trump, our own internal trade barriers between provinces. While the federal government is attempting to negotiate with the United States, there are in fact laws and regulations that make trade, even entirely within Canada, more expensive. These are fully within our own control. Why do they exist? How easy or hard would it be to dismantle them? And if we could dismantle them, how could they improve affordability in Canada? I recently wrote about this issue in the Hamilton Spectator with my friend Sabine El-Chidiac from the Consumer Choice Centre. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Sabine, as well as by Ryan Manucha, author of the award-winning book on interprovincial trade, booze, cigarettes, and constitutional dust-ups. Sabine, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today. First, let's talk broadly about how trade barriers work and how they have an effect on prices. Sabine, maybe you can explain this concept at the kind of fundamental level, how tariffs, whether they're tariffs or regulations, can make life expensive for Canadians.
Well, trade barriers are basically restrictions on trade imposed by government. So things like subsidies, tariffs, anything like that. And it ends up always costing consumers a lot. So consumers end up paying more for things like they buy every day, like alcohol, where a bottle of wine is going to be sold cheaper abroad than another province from where it's made because of limited shipments and lots of regulations. One that we're very familiar with is dairy products. When we think about supply management, we think about foreign dairy, but it's actually having an effect on interprovincial trade of dairy as well. Canadians on there's there Canadians have they impose these restrictions on dairy abroad, but it's also affecting us because there's provincial quotas that raise prices, and those quotas are also on other provinces. So things like that, when you talk about interprovincial trade and limitations there, are really costing consumers a lot of money. It also takes an effect on things like housing because you can only buy, there's the regulations, or you can only buy lumber, or there's building codes or things like that, procurement policies that lead to provincial developers and builders having to buy lumber from their home province, even if it's cheaper in another province. We're not even talking outside of Canada. And that ends up making houses more expensive. And then it hurts us in a housing crisis that we're going through as Canadians. One that I'm sure we'll talk about today is trucking and freight costs. That should really annoy Canadian consumers because that is affecting everything from their clothing to their food. There's so many fuel regulations and safety regulations. So having to actually comply with these different schemes in each province means that everything is more expensive because your trucker needs to stop the truck to change his tires so he complies with another province's regulations, and this is within the same country. So it does seem very bizarre, and it should seem bizarre to consumers, why they're paying more for this.
Ryan, Sabine gave some great examples there. Maybe you could add a few of your own of these internal trade barriers and how they might look different from the tariffs that we see being imposed by the US. These are typically called non-tariff barriers. So what's an example of that you were thinking of?
That's exactly it. Gone are the days where we have customs officers at the border of Upper and Lower Canada monitoring the passage of goods flowing up and down the St. Lawrence. It is these non-tariff barriers, and it's also just more broadly the disharmony in regulation across the country. And Sabine raised some excellent examples. When it comes to trucking, it's the varying driver qualifications for long combination vehicles. It's the non-mutual recognition of farm license plates. It's the varying max weights in heavy-duty tow trucks. It's these things that will start, if we broaden out from that, we're talking about the definition of high visibility safety peril or the maximum chemical exposure limits and occupational health safety legislation, electrical codes being another one. But these all have big impacts. Like trucking, as being brought up, imposes 8.3% of the cost of freight rates, $1.6 billion a year to the Canadian economy. Construction codes were set to get a lift of about $1 billion a year following implementation in 2028. So these really matter.
Yeah, they matter a lot. And as a result of these non-tariff barriers, the costs of all kinds of things go up for Canadians. And when we talk about affordability in Canada and fighting, the tariffs that are being imposed from the South, it's baffling to me that for decades, nothing has been done about these non-tariff restrictions on trade within our own country. We've got to go to break now, but we will continue to discuss this when we're back.